Did you know that the romantic love that occurs in the early stages of love is thought to last about only 2 years in general? Apparently, changes in hormone and blood neurotransmitter levels associated with romantic love tend to return to normal levels within 24 hours after experiencing it. But still, different people express and even report feeling love differently. That's a fact. But yet, there are many scientific studies to prove or even to analyze and investigate this phenomenon subjectively. That is, until this one in 2022 study with more than 800 young adults as participants, in which they were asked about their experience with romantic love regarding 4 characteristics normally associated with being in love: their intensity of the relationship, the obsessive thinking about their partner, their commitment with the relationship, and of course, their frequency of sex per week. And in addition to this, they also tested my favorite thing in psychometrics, which is their personality types. So no, this is not a video about what love is, or even the psychology of love. It is rather a video to categorize the different ways people can relate to each other in what seems to be a romantic or a stable relationship. And with this, the scientists of this experiment were able to categorize 4 different types of relationships accordingly to the data they were analyzing. First, the moderate romantic lovers, which compose over than 40% of the participants, the intense romantic lovers with about 30% of them, the mild romantic lovers with 20%, and the libidinous romantic lovers with around 10% of the participants. And what do these titles mean? Well, let's start with the first one, the moderate romantic lovers, which also seems to be the most common type of relationship to have. They are a cluster that exhibits relatively low intensity, low obsessive thinking, relatively high commitment, and a moderate frequency of sex per week. Just like their name says, they are mostly moderate in all of the characteristics. They are also most likely to be male than female, which makes sense if you think about the male archetype as being more stoic than women are. They are the least likely to have children, the least likely to report being creative, being distracted, impatient, and the most likely to report feeling self-confident. They really are moderate in everything, and perhaps it shows with this self-confidence. They don't need great gestures of love. They don't need too much intensity. They are secure in their relationships and just go with the flow, let's say. And personally, I hate everything on this cluster, but yeah, it makes sense that they are the most common type of relationship. Would they be on TV shows or a movie? Probably not, but they also seem to be the most realistic. And you know what? Sometimes reality surely is very boring. But if you are looking for a romantic fantasy of sorts, then the second largest cluster is the intense romantic lovers, and they represent 29.42% of the participants, and they report having the highest intensity in their relationships, the highest obsessive thinking, the highest commitment, and relatively high frequency of sex. So they really seem to be on top here. They are also those that reported the highest proportion of having felt in love before their romantic relationship. So probably when they were just knowing their partner, they were probably already in love with them. And if the moderate romantics were the highest in males, the intense romantics are actually most commonly females, and also the highest to identify themselves with a non-traditional gender, around 3.78%, which is a very low score, but it is also highest among all of the other types, and it makes sense in the broader population. But in contradiction to this, they also had the highest gender inequality. Although the researchers don't explain that in detail, I would presume that the men in these relationships seem to be more masculine and the women seem to be more feminine, apparently. Maybe also in other areas such as salaries and interests and so on, which also makes sense if you think about this romantic love as that which we watch in fiction, and fiction being mostly archetypical. Those people also seem to fill in those shoes more than the other clusters, which doesn't mean that gender or love is socially constructed. I don't believe in that. It's just to say that the people who express having more romantic love and romantic relationships apparently, although have more non-traditional genders, also seem to have this greater distinction between masculine and feminine than the other types of relationships have. Why? Well, I would say biology and archetypes are to go here, but that's a topic for another video. Some other areas on the intense romantic lovers is that they are also the lowest to be diagnosed with autism, apparently. How interesting, right? If autism is normally associated with this lack of reciprocity and mirroring behaviors, we can argue how much those things are necessary for the experience of this intense romantic relationship. After all, they also rated their partner and themselves as very high in value. So they thought that their partner or their person, these other person they are in a relationship with, could offer them something good. And they themselves could also offer something valuable to their partner. Reciprocity was a key factor for them. But even more than that, they also believed that their partner had a higher value than themselves. So there was a discrepancy in sometimes viewing their partner as superior or idealistic, but not specifically themselves as inferior because of that. And if you go to the personality traits, you will see that those people are also those that rated the highest in agreeableness. A personality trait that is exactly about this. They give more than they will like to receive. They rather help the other person first and then themselves. And of course, this can come with all of its own problems when dysfunctional. But here, it was also seen as the characteristic that made the intense romantic lovers to also regard their relationship with the highest satisfaction of all clusters. And in addition to this, they also had the highest conscientiousness, a trait related to viewing the future, to making sacrifices in the present, so something else can happen later. So they not only saw this in life, but also in the relationships. Sometimes you need to work so other things can happen. You need to look forward, to plan, to inhibit your most impulsive desires in order to maintain not only peace in the present, but throughout time as well. And this doesn't mean you should repress things, but sometimes just not care about them or let them go. This is probably because this type of relationship also scored the lowest in neuroticism, a trait related to negative emotions, to feeling anxiety, depression, fear, and stress. So the intense romantic lovers were also proner to control themselves, to not only care so much about the negative feelings or negative thoughts as well. And if you think about how much this social connection, this physical connection, is associated with oxytocin, the hormone of love, and how much oxytocin is capable of reducing levels of cortisol, the hormone of stress, it also makes sense that if you relate better with others, it not only means that you are more calm and passive person, but also that relating to others in a more intimate level can also develop those traits in you. And just to end this cluster, the intense romantic lovers had the lowest proportion in reporting risky driving, in drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, and taking drugs. They were very healthy people, or at least had some very healthy habits. And they also reported the highest proportion in enjoying their work, in being sociable, in planning for the future. 83% of them reported that in their lives, and that's really huge. They were also less shy, they were more talkative, they think it faster and made more jokes as well. And overall, they had the higher reported mood with 84% among all the clusters. They were the happiest of all the other types of romantic relationships. And instead of talking about the mild romantic lovers, which compose 20% of the cluster, I will talk about the libidinous romantic lovers that are actually the smallest cluster with only 9.64%, because their status was very similar to the intense romantic lovers, but with some differences. For example, they exhibit having relatively high intensity in their relationships, relatively high obsessive thinking about their partner, relatively high commitment, but with an exceptionally high frequency of sex, which was what defined themselves as a very unique group. Because while most of the relationships, moderate, mild, and intense, have had sex at least 2 times per week, on average, the libidinous lovers had an average of sex 10 times per week. How crazy is that? They were also those who have been in love the longest length of time, which makes sense considering that sex is one of the biggest correlations in healthy long-term relationships. And they were surprisingly average in men and women, with a slightly higher frequency to be male, but not much. It was only 2% more than women, which actually surprised me. And they were the least likely to identify as a non-traditional gender, with only 1.28%. So they were not very into LGBTQ stuff, or at least consider themselves as. They also had the best relationships related to quality of life, and the highest proportion in not being anxious, not feeling worried or depressed. I will hypothesize that oxytocin, in which I was talking earlier, apparently had the highest influence here, once the sex is one of the ways to get this oxytocin, and apparently reduce the negative emotions to the lowest scores, and therefore not feeling so much anxious, not so much stress, and negative emotions overall. They were also the highest in openness to experience, a personality trait related to like to try new things, to being adaptable, while agreeableness is about offering something to other person. Openness is about being open to accept what comes in your way. It is the true Wu way of Taoism, let's say. They just go with the flow. That's their thing. They also reported needing less sleep, and I wonder why. Feeling more energetic of all with 82.05%. They are also most likely to want to travel with 88%. They are most likely to spend money with 79%. And of course, the most interested type of relationship in sex with 92%. Who would have guessed? Still, in personality traits, they were also the highest in extroversion, which makes sense once extroversion is related to sexual activity as well. And a tiny curiosity is that they were also the most likely to smoke cigarettes. And my theory is that cigars tend to promote acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter normally activated, let's say, when people are doing physical exercises like running, but also when people are more relaxed, like when people do yoga, that activates this neurotransmitter and therefore this relaxation. But also something common in sexual activity as well, both as a prerequisite sometimes and a product or a result of doing just that. So maybe they were seeking more relaxation, or because they were more relaxed, they were prone to make sex more? Well, who knows? It's the egg and the chicken story all over again here. And finally, with 20% of frequency, the my romantic lovers are, for me, apparently the worst type of relationship. They had the lowest in almost every score in intensity, in obsessive thinking, in commitment, and frequency of sex. They were the least likely to have felt in love before the relationship. That is, they only felt in love after being in the relationship. So for them, Maybe love was a byproduct of being with another person rather than a prerequisite. That is, they were first expecting the other person to say that they loved them, that their partner definitely was in love with them, so they could express and open themselves afterwards. It was a reactive form of love, roughly speaking. They were, of course, more likely to be male than female, and also heterosexual. They also had the lowest levels of gender inequality, so these men thought that men and women were the same, probably also thinking that, well, why should I go and talk to women? They should come and talk to me, right? That's the future that we live in today. Damn society, and so on. Who knows? This is just a hypothesis. Again, the study doesn't say exactly what they consider gender equality and inequality. But yeah, these couples were the most equal of all, and that didn't seem to be very good for them. There's also some statistics on divorce saying that when men and women normally gain the same salaries, they were proner to be divorced some later in life. They were also the highest in proportion to not be in cohabitation with their loved ones, with 67. So 2 every 3 of them did not live with their partner, showing us how much this presence, this being with the other person physically, can be very important to love. And that's for you who fall in love with every e-girl or e-boy you see on the internet. That's actually me. That used to be me, but not anymore. And of course, these types of relationship are also the least satisfied with their relationship. Although on average, they seem to be satisfied, but not as the other groups seem to be satisfied with their relationships. They also exhibit the lowest health and functioning scores in a relationship, the poorest relationships related to quality of life, and the highest proportion to be diagnosed with autism, which I have already covered a video here on the channel, and you can clearly see what this means on that video. I'll try to put it in the description or somewhere up here as well. They were also the least likely to inflate their own or even their partner. So they apparently didn't have a very high self-esteem and also didn't consider their partner all that cool and amazing as the other relationship types did. They had the smallest discrepancy between their own and their partner's value as well. So they didn't think much of their partner, which seems just sad to me. They didn't thought that this partner could offer them all that much. And just to end the description of this cluster, they were also the least healthy of all the types. They were the least energetic, the least active, the least interested in sex. They did not think faster to make decisions. They were the most likely to report risky driving, to drink coffee and alcohol, and also to take drugs. And in comparison, they were also the lowest to report higher moods, with only 62%, which isn't very, very low, but also isn't as high as the other types of relationships did. And also, when it came to personality traits, they had the lowest in every single score. The lowest extroversion, the lowest agreeableness, the lowest conscientiousness. So they didn't think much about the future and also had the lowest openness to experience. And that's it. These are the 4 types of relationship. Did you recognize yourself in any of them? But more importantly, what can we learn with all of this? Apparently, if you want to have a good relationship, you should start thinking more about your partner than yourself. You shouldn't be too fearful of showing passion, commitment, or even idealization of them. All of these seems to be very common in relationships. But also reciprocity is just as important. It cannot be one-sided. In addition to this, the frequency of sex and probably the quality of the sex as well is a very good measurement and good thing to have. And apparently the best predictors of commitment and satisfaction in relationships. Maybe due to the correlations with personality traits, which are high extroversion, high agreeableness, very low neuroticism, which is the tendency to have lower anxiety, lower depression, lower levels of stress, or the proclivity to care and to matter less with them. Also having a very high correlation with high conscientiousness, which is this ability to make long-term visions, to make future plans, to see what can become, to work and to delay gratifications, to see the future you want in your head and go after that. And in addition to sex, the physical intimacy, closeness, and to live in the same place also seem to be very important. And you should not ignore that men and women are different. And if you are able to be yourself, to express yourself, not trying to go against the societal norms and the culture, what culture defines, just because it is contrary thing to do, that seems to be a good predictor of a good relationship, apparently. If you're a man, be a man. If you're a woman, be a woman, and whatever these things means. Find good models and just be yourself. Plus, you should also try to be spontaneous. Try to accept things as they come and try to do new things here and there. Being more energetic, or showing your happiness, being more motivated. All of these don't need to be only products of your relationship, but also it can be prerequisites of it. That is, things that come before having a relationship and then being reinforced because of the relationship you have. And in addition to this, you should not wait for the demonstration of love of the other person. Love because you love them, not because you need a certainty that they love you or that they need to do something to prove their love for you. And maybe you shouldn't do the same as well. Because the last thing we can learn with this article is to just be confident. And that's it. Self-confidence in the value you can give to your partner, the confidence in the relationship you both have, and the self-sufficiency in yourself. You can be a good partner, but mostly you can also be good with yourself. And what I see here is this. The things that happen or that come out of a relationship apparently are also those things that happened before the relationship, or even the things that made this relationship to happen and being possible. And who knows? What do you think? Write a comment, subscribe, like. My name is Julio Cesar. I'm a psychologist here in Brazil. And see you next time. Goodbye.